O Lord, may the words of my mouth and meditation of each and every one of our hearts be acceptable in your sight. For you are our strength and our redeemer. Amen. There was a pastor came into a new church and got up the first Sunday and preached a sermon. People said, "Not bad. I think I kind of like this." Next week, he gets up, preaches a sermon. A couple of people said, "There's something about that that kind of sounds familiar." The next week, Sunday comes, the pastor gets up, preaches a sermon, and people are like, that sounds awful familiar. I'm thinking I heard this before. The next week, the pastor gets up and preaches a sermon, and the majority of the people in the congregation were, "Yes, he's been preaching the same sermon for 4 weeks." Somebody says, well, you go up and tell him. I'm not telling him, you tell him. Get the PPR chair, they'll tell him. And so they go up to the pastor and said, "Pastor, I'm not really sure how to say this, but people have been talking and they're saying that you preached the same sermon for 4 weeks." The pastor said, "Yes, I figure until you listen, why change it?" As I was reading the scriptures for today, that thought popped into my head, because the scriptures in the lectionary for this period of time are all about our personal responsibility and understanding what we are supposed to do as Christians, how we're supposed to be acting, how we're supposed to be following Jesus, and it's kind of an ongoing theme. So I look at it, it's like, well, I'm going to preach the same sermon as I did the past couple of weeks. Fortunately, I don't have it written down, so I can't preach exactly the same sermon. But, you got the story of David here. And if you remember, we read the story of David and Bathsheba last week. And the story of David and Bathsheba, 2 weeks ago, last week was Nathan. David does this great sin against God and against Uriah. Nathan the prophet comes up to him, this is what we read last week, and says that God is going to bring pain and suffering upon your house. And all these bad things happen. We took a jump from last week up until this week. And this story here is part of the fallout from that incident. His son Absalom decided that Dad's getting old, and I'm tired of waiting for him to die, and I want to be king. So Absalom raises an army, and he gets people loyal to him, and he raises this big army to attack the king. Well, David hears of it because of his people and his spies, and he takes off and heads out. And people follow him because they're loyal to him. And then this story is when David, with the army he raised, comes back and defeats Absalom's army. But he tells his commanders, don't kill Absalom. So Absalom's riding along on a donkey, and he's galloping along on a donkey. I don't know how well a donkey gallops, but he's galloping along on a donkey. And there's this big oak tree with a low-hanging branch. And as the donkey goes under it, the branch grabs him around the neck, and he gets hung. And he's hanging there by his head. And men from the army of David surround him and kill him. The last verse we read here is David lamenting the death of his son. In the reading to the Ephesians, Paul, likely talking to new Christians as the introduction says, talks about how we're supposed to live as Christians. How we are supposed to live in a way that's different than the world. Now, we're all part of the world. I mean, we go to jobs during the week, we have families, we have friends, we go shopping, we interact with people all the time. And we interact with people 7 days a week. And so, the way in which people act, the things we see on TV, the things we read about in the newspaper, magazines, and on the internet, tend to become the things that we accept as being the norm. These are the ways that people should act. If I were to ask you what drives the economy, you'd likely say consumer spending. So I am going to be patriotic and go out and buy a new TV, right? These are the kind of messages that are sent to us. But that's exactly the opposite of what the gospel says. And that's exactly what Paul is addressing here. He's saying that us, as followers of Christ that have been loved by God, should turn our backs on this other way of behavior. And that we should live in emulation of Jesus Christ, giving to those in need without thought to the hardship it might cause me, taking care of people who are in pain, mental, emotional, physical pain, being there for those who are lonely, not gossiping. That's a big one among people today. I mean, how many shows do you see on TV where people gossip? Every one of the reality shows, you get one group of people sitting over by themselves talking about somebody else. That's the definition of gossip. Lying to get what you want. Right? Manipulating things. Doing outlandish things on a presidential debate to get yourself even more attention than you've been getting. These are the ways that we're supposed to act according to everything that's around us. God says no. Love each other. Number one, love God. Number two, love each other. And if you remember what Jesus said when asked about the greatest commandments, he mentioned those two, and he said everything comes from those. You know, one of the things that I've been asked a lot of times is, you know, when we read these verses in the Bible, there are verses that you look at and you'll say, I don't know how to interpret that. Paul says women should not wear jewelry. How many of you women have jewelry on today? Pretty much every one of you, right? So does that make you sinners and we should throw you out of the church? No. Paul was writing that because the only people who wore jewelry and makeup were temple prostitutes. He didn't want people to think that Christians had temple prostitutes. How do I figure out those kind of things? When I look at the Bible, I look at it and say, okay, is this at its root based in love? If I read something in the Bible and I think it means one thing and it's not at its root based in love, I need to go back and read it again and think. Because everything that comes from God is based at root in love. And so what Paul is saying is that is how we as Christians should live our lives. Now, Jesus was contending with some folks around his hometown. You could tell by the, isn't it? Jesus the carpenter, Joseph's son, we've known him forever. How could he say he came down from heaven? And he tells them that, you know, your ancestors ate manna in the wilderness, which was bread that came from God and sustained them. One of the interesting things about that story when the manna comes, the instructions that are given, Moses gives the people that he heard from God, were each family is to collect enough for one day. Don't collect any extra. Just enough for that one day. On Friday, you can collect double because you can't go out and work on the Sabbath, so you can do that. But other than that, you can collect only enough for one day. Some people said, well, let me get a little extra and hold on to it, and I don't have to do as much work tomorrow. And by the morning, it was full of worms and it rotted. Manna, yes, it sustained the body. It was physical food that helped the people stay alive during the 40 years of wandering in the wilderness. But it also taught the people that they needed to rely on God on a daily basis for sustenance. So now Jesus evokes that image to talk about living bread. You know what one of the rumors was about the early church? In the early days of Christianity? That Christians are cannibals. They eat the body and drink the blood of their family. If you don't know what that means, it kind of sounds that way, doesn't it? But Jesus, in talking about his body as living bread that we symbolize when we do communion, he was talking about something that sustains us and that we need to rely on a daily basis. Just like the Israelites in the desert had to rely on the manna coming down every day so they would have something to eat. Jesus reminds us in this passage that we need to rely on Jesus Christ, the Holy Spirit, the love of God, in order to live our lives the way we're supposed to be living it, like Paul was talking about. You know, when we do bad things, they have consequences. I told the story last week, the week before, about the kid who climbs up in a tree in the backyard after Dad tells him not to. And the kid falls out of the tree and his arm gets broken. Dad takes him to the hospital on the way home. Kid says to Dad, Dad, I realized why you told me not to climb up the tree. and I'm sorry that I disobeyed you. And the father said, that's okay, but the arm is still broken. See, when we do stuff that we shouldn't be doing, there's consequences to that. The story of David tells us that. And take time at some point and read all the stuff that happens in that story of David, from Bathsheba onward. You'll find all kinds of really nasty things happening in David's house. All are a result of David's dalliance with Bathsheba and his killing of Uriah, his murder of Uriah. Paul says, live in love, being concerned about others, taking care of others, honoring God, relying on God. Now, if we do that, how would we end up doing bad things that have those kind of consequences? It's not going to happen. My wife had a friend whose husband went to a Christian 12-step program. And I mentioned this before, but they told him to think of the Bible, the word Bible, which actually means library, but to think of it as basic instructions before leaving Earth. And I kind of like that, because it does give us guidance for life. I mean, you have to adjust it for the times and all those kind of things. I wouldn't allow women to speak in public, and we have women clergy, right? And we were actually in Atlantic City for an annual conference a few years ago. We're processing from the boardwalk all the way down to the convention center, about 6 blocks, in our robes and everything else, and there's people on the side of the robes. You're good with signs. You're going to hell because they have women clergy. But there are a lot of things like that in the Bible that are societally based. You know, they were based on where the people were at the time, what the society was, those kind of things. But there are also universal things that apply to us throughout time. Again, how do you tell the difference? Is it rooted and based in love? That's my preferred way of doing it. And that's never led me astray. Just as the doctrines that we hold to are rooted and based in love, so should our lives. Our lives need to be based that same way, just as Paul talks about, so that we can be faithful witnesses to the love of God in Christ. And that when people see us, that yeah, we have headaches, but we don't let them overwhelm us. Yes, we have things go bad, but it doesn't destroy our lives and our psyche. And we still have this contentment, the peace that passes understanding, as the Bible refers to it. You know, it passes understanding, we just can't figure it out. But I'll tell you what, you live that way and you have that in your life, the people around you who are running around like chickens without their heads throughout this life, and they're going crazy with anxiety and worry and all these kind of things, they're going to look at you and say, you know what? I wish I had what she had. Can I talk to you a minute? I got a question to ask. We become very powerful witnesses to Jesus Christ. And for what life really can be. The joy and fullness that God makes available. Let's pray. Lord God, we give you thanks for the joy and fullness that you have for us in this life. God, sometimes living in a society like this, and really in any society, because we see the same kind of things in the Bible, especially in 1 and 2 Corinthians, we are pulled in all kinds of different ways. We're pulled to go in ways that are contrary to your way of love. We're pulled to try to gather for ourselves wealth, fame, and power. Because we're told that's what this life is about. We're told that if people look at you in awe because of the things that you've accumulated, because of the things that you've done, that then our lives will be complete. But God, David had power. David had wealth. David had fame. But his life was turmoil because he refused to obey you. God, forgive us for the times that we have not obeyed you. Help us to live as Paul has asked us to live rooted in love, so that we might bring glory to you. And as a side effect, have lives that are full of joy and peace. God, as we strive to live these lives with the help of your Spirit, we have concerns about people we know who struggle with all different kinds of maladies. Some struggle with physical problems, some with emotional or mental problems, some with the loneliness that comes from being isolated from others, some with medical problems, some with financial worries. God, all of these things provoke anxiety and work to destroy that peace that comes from you. And so for those folks we know who are in these circumstances, we come before you this morning praying for them, lifting their names, that you might envelop them with joy. For all who have lost loved ones, Lord, in your mercy,